Good evening. God bless you. I'm Jacquie Gales Webb, host of HUR at Home Inspiration, and also host of Gospel Spirit on 96.3 WHUR. This is March 19th, 2023. We're running through the Women's History Month, and with some outstanding guests this month. I'm just so thrilled to have our guest tonight, and I'm deeply honored. And I want to thank everyone who has already joined us in the chat. Charles Keener, Latanya Davis Bennett, God bless you. Beloved Country, and Pamela Gordon. Good evening to you too, Pamela. And Bernice Lane, so thankful that you were able to join us this evening. And I invite everyone who joins us in the chat, let us know that you're here. If you have any questions, please ask. If you have any comments, if you just want to say hallelujah, that's okay. We appreciate that. I grew up in Westbury, Long Island, New York. And every summer, my parents would take me down south, as they called it. We either went by train or by car. We'd go to Greenville, South Carolina, and see my grandmother, Bertha Gales. We'd go to Athens, Georgia, and see my grandmother, Hattie Mae Johnson. And if you are blessed, you had experiences with your grandmothers. I certainly did enjoy mine. I was very young. They passed on before I was a teenager, actually, so I didn't get that much time to spend with them. I do remember the story my parents told me of when grandmother Hattie Mae Johnson came up to Harlem. The first 3 years of my life, my parents and I lived in Harlem, in the Riverton, there in Harlem, and on the 12th floor. And grandmother Hattie Mae came up from Athens to the Riverton apartment on the 12th floor and said, "Get my granddaughter out of here before she falls out this window." And sure enough, they bought a little house out in Westbury, Long Island. Not long after that, thanks to grandmother Hattie Mae, I had a suburban upbringing rather than an urban one. But having a grandparent in your life is very, very important, impactful, powerful. And our guest has written a book actually about the mothers in the Holiness Church that actually raised her in my grandmother's house. And great book. I'm actually into the first few chapters, and her writing is spectacular. Her name is Dr. Yolanda Pierce. She's a professor and dean of Howard University School of Divinity. She is a scholar of African American religious history, womanist, theologian rather. She studies race and religion, as well as public theologian, activist, and commentator. She's an alumna of Princeton University and Cornell University, and she served as the founding director of the Center for the Study of African American Religious Life at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And we're going to talk to her about her book, In My Grandmother's House: Black Women, Faith, and the Stories We Inherit. So please, it's my honor to welcome to HUR at Home Inspiration, Dean Yolanda Pierce. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you. It is an honor and a privilege to be here tonight. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you.
Well, wonderful book, great writing. I'm just so inspired by what I have already read in this book. But I wanted to ask you, in your resume and in your introduction, I said you're a womanist. What exactly is a womanist?
Okay, sure. That's a great question. Let's just get right into it. So I'm a womanist theologian. So womanist theology is, it's an academic category, but basically in about the 1960s and 1970s or so, there were a number of women entering the academy doing PhDs in religion, studying theology. But most of them were white women, and most of the scholarship they produced were about white women. At the same time, there were a number of this first generation of Black theologians in the academy, people like James Cone and Diotis Roberts, and they were studying Black theology. But most of all of them were men, and most of Black theology was kind of looking at things from a male point of view. As Black women entered the academy for the first time, and this first generation of Black women got PhDs in theology, they wanted to center the stories, the experiences, the theology, the beliefs of Black women. What we talk about today about intersectionality. So, womanist theology is a school of theology that takes the lives and experiences of Black women, women of color, as the center point, the vantage point for how we do our theological work. So instead of a 200-year tradition of doing theology from a German framework, because this is truly how theologians are taught, a German framework or a European framework. Womanist theologians are saying we center our own stories, experiences, lives, understanding of who God is. We start with ourselves and we work our way toward this God talk that we do in theology.
Is there an example of that you could give us to kind of firm up what that means?
Sure. So again, you had this theology that was being produced, and it was talking about, well, who gets access to salvation, right? That this is a question for Christians. Who can be saved? Under what conditions can one be saved? And so questions, we call it soteriology, right? That's the school of salvation. Imagine that conversation if that conversation is only being had by the most privileged, by the people who have the most access to everything. That's a very different conversation than even the biblical conversation. The biblical conversation is about the least of these, right? Like what Jesus's ministry was to the marginalized, the people on the fringes of society, the people who were the very least, the people who were the overlooked. And so womanist theology says, okay, so let's take this idea of being made in the image and likeness of God. Are we made in the image and likeness of God? What does it mean if you walk into a Black church and their stained glass windows are still of a white Jesus, right? Womanist theology would say, for us to understand ourselves fully made in the likeness and image of God, we need reflections of God that look like ourselves, right? And so it is to really contest the ways in which we have allowed others to dominate who we understand who Jesus is.
Now, I'm glad you brought that up because in one of the first 2 chapters of your book, you talk about the fact that in your grandmother's house, there was always a picture of the Black Jesus. And
Yes.
Many others in the church had the white Jesus with the blue eyes pictures, right,
Yes.
next to Martin Luther King and President Kennedy and everything. And I'll always remember the first time I saw the image of a Black Jesus was in Southeast Washington here in DC back in the 70s or early 80s when I went to Union Temple Baptist Church. And they had a wonderful image of a Black Jesus with an afro. And it was just what a powerful vision. So I wanted to
That's
ask
exactly
you
right.
why your grandmother, she was in Brooklyn, right? But she was in the
Yes, my
holiness.
grandparents were in Brooklyn, yes.
She was in the holiness faith. How come she had an image of a Black Jesus so early on?
Now that's really a question I don't actually know, like how my grandparents or how these other folks in this, small holiness Pentecostal church really had this image. But I'm telling you, I always understood Jesus to be a brown person, right? Like I have just recently returned from my 3rd trip to Israel. And the people who are indigenous to the region, the people who are indigenous to the places where Jesus walked, where Jesus was born. Literally, I've been to Bethlehem, I've been to Nazareth. Those folks look like us. Those people are as James Baldwin would say, they're sun-baked Hebrews, they're sun-baked Palestinians, right? So I grew up with Jesus who was brown, and some of my friends, we used to watch the show called Good Times, and there was an episode on Good Times about Black Jesus. And so Jesus was brown, Jesus had, textured hair. Here's the difference that it made. It wasn't just that I was seeing this picture. We don't know what Jesus looked like. What I was seeing was there is beauty in our Blackness. And so I have no trouble then thinking about image and likeness of God in the brothers and the Black men that I see day to day, my students, right? My colleagues. Being at a place like Howard, I'm walking around campus and every person I see is made in the image and likeness of God because I grew up with brown skin, dreadlock Jesus. And it looks like the students who sit in my classroom. And that's a really powerful gift to give someone because then you don't have to unlearn the white supremacy. So some people had to unlearn kind of the white Jesus that they were used to and really sit with the historical context of a Jesus born in an Afro-Asiatic place with brown skin in the desert. My grandparents gave me a powerful gift saying, Jesus looks like you.
Mm, mm, mm. Your grandparents were also very liberal in the Holiness Church with you, because I don't think that there was a whole lot of impetus behind women becoming deans of divinity schools and ministers in the Holiness Church. So how did that happen?
Yes, I'm sure if they knew, if they had lived long enough to see it, they'd be a little surprised. So what my story is very, very common. I went away to college, and I had some wonderful, wonderful teachers while I was an undergraduate. I took an introduction to African American studies with Cornell West. I took a class with Toni Morrison. I had really powerful teachers, and they encouraged me to go to graduate school. And I went to graduate school, and eventually, at some point, I finished my PhD, and then I've had an academic career, and so that's a very kind of traditional path. My grandparents could not have anticipated that because, like many African Americans, we didn't have that in our own history. I was the first generation to go to college. My grandparents were born literally in the rural South. They came from families that were sharecroppers. They were part of this great migration of African Americans from the South to the North after the end of World War I and World War II. And so when we use this expression about us being our ancestors' wildest dreams, that's more than just a notion. They could not have imagined a story in which I'm a dean of a school or I have a PhD, because that wasn't something that they could themselves see, but they laid the foundation, and I am the product of their prayers.
Oh, I know they're so proud. Now, you also talk about in your book, I found it very interesting, the part where you talk about the practice of kneeling during prayer, that it's not really submission, it's a power situation. Can you talk about that? Because a lot of modern people who find themselves and call themselves spiritual don't really get into the kneeling part. But you found that the kneeling with your grandmother, it has a certain power to it.
So, part of why I'm writing about the church mothers and my grandparents and these traditions that are sort of just going away is because we can't forget our history, and that's a big part of why we do this work. So the kneeling piece for me, we used to kneel and pray. I was taught as a little child. Right? I remember being 5, 6 years old, and you would kneel at the foot of the bed, and you would, say your little prayer, and that's how you learn to pray. And it's not so much the kneeling itself; it is the posture, a posture of I'm listening, God. I'm yielding. I am available. And I think that what we are losing in so many of our faith traditions is a sense of the holy. right? We might go to church. It's very short now, right? So now we want to be in and out in an hour. And I confess, I'm one of those people. I'm looking at the watch. Okay, let's wrap it up, right? But we're losing the sense of, is there power here? Is this a holy, sanctified moment? And so that posture of kneeling, you don't kneel to do other things. So that posture of kneeling was the reminder that this is a holy moment, and you stop and you listen and you take seriously that you have the privilege to engage in conversation with God. And I think we're losing some of these traditions, and I think it's a loss for the church and certainly for the Black community.
Mm. Well, I live in the world of gospel music.
Yes.
What do you think about gospel music today? There's, contemporary, traditional, praise and worship.
Yeah.
And you talked about your grandmother singing in the kitchen. There was
Yes.
always singing going on. So talk a bit about
Yes.
gospel music today.
So I love gospel music. Like you probably grew up on it. I love all the genres. Love listening. And that's a joy. Here's where I'm worried. We used to know all of the verses to hymns. We used to sing hymns. And so this isn't, I don't think it has to be an either or. I don't think you have to choose that you have praise and worship and you don't have this, or you have that and you don't have that. But there's something really powerful about hymns. And there was something powerful about knowing the verses to hymns. I laugh now when people don't even know the verses to lift every voice and sing. It was just February. And I was like, y'all, we sing this all the time in February, especially at a place like Howard. People don't even know the verses. So what I think I'm reacting to is, I love contemporary gospel. I love how we have really shifted the genre. So there's much more hip hop. It's much more infused and inflected with other forms of music. And that's beautiful, but we can't forget the horse that brought us, right? We can't forget how we got to be where we are. And some of that was what a friend we have in Jesus. Some of that was blessed assurance. And so my only worry is that as we continue to do gospel music, we'll forget the foundation of the very music and theology that got us to the place where we're winning all of the awards for our gospel music.
Right. I hear that definitely. What are you seeing in the young students at the Howard University Divinity School?
The students are amazing. The students are why we get up in the morning and do this work. So in terms of theological schools just across the country, including at Howard, what we see is a real shift. A generation ago, if you went to divinity school, you were expecting to go into full-time ministry. You were expecting to become a pastor or priest or minister or, a rabbi, imam, whatever your tradition was. That is no longer the case. Less than 50% of students who attend divinity school actually go and work in an ecclesial setting, go work in a faith practice. Right? Less than 50%. So what does it mean? It means that the majority of students who are coming, one, sense that they have a calling, they have a vocation, that God has called them to a purpose, but two, that purpose is being expressed in other places outside of our houses of faith. So social justice organizations, nonprofits, classrooms, the sense of social justice is so powerful for students, and particularly for women, many of whom, because of certain kind of politics or denominational polity, will never even have an opportunity to be called to the pastoral role. They find an expression of how they do pastoral work in chaplaincy, and in other ways. So we have seen a real shift over just one generation.
That is fascinating.
It is.
Going
It
to
is.
school, the School of Divinity, and strengthening your faith and your knowledge of faith and the use of your faith in social justice. That's just amazing.
Absolutely. And so we have to be available and open for students who say, God has called me to a great work, right? But that great work might be in foster care, right? That great work might be at a charter school. And the theological foundation that they receive is the impetus for doing this great work. But fewer and fewer students are choosing ministry as their primary expression, and fewer churches need pastors. Churches are closing. We are significantly seeing the decline of religion in America, even among Black folk. And so we've really had to shift what it is that we are teaching students to do if they're coming to a divinity school but not planning to be a pastor.
And there are organizations that are helping people who want to practice their faith in the workplace. You know,
Absolutely.
that's very
Absolutely.
important. Wow, that's very enlightening. So getting back to the students, what is your as dean of the Howard University School of Divinity, what is your vision for the school? Do you have a strategy or a plan or a goal in mind in the near future or the far future?
Absolutely. I really fundamentally believe that divinity school is different than seminary. Seminary are usually places that have a denominational focus and emphasis. So you might attend a Presbyterian seminary if you're Presbyterian. But a divinity school is different. The study of religion is at the center. And so for me, what that has to be it has to be interfaith. We have to know our neighbor's faith. We have to know and respect it. I actually wish, even before they got to me at the graduate school level, that every undergraduate in this country had the opportunity to take a class in world religions, because a lot of what we see happening, the political side, the economic side, is actually about religion. Sometimes we think it's about race and it's about religion. And so there should be a religious fluency, right, that we have about all of the various world religions. So that's important at a divinity school. What's important also at a divinity school is the study. Right. We are of the 6 historically Black theological institutions that are accredited by the accrediting body that accredits divinity schools. We are the only one at Howard that still offers the biblical languages. And so we offer Greek, we offer Hebrew, we sometimes offer Aramaic and Ugaritic. This is important. You should be able to know something about the language, the original languages of the text that you claim to be the document of your faith. You should know something about it. How was it put together? Right? How did it come together? How did it come to be? And so those languages are absolutely vital for that, because sometimes it doesn't say what we think that it says because we don't know the original languages. So that academic piece, right? Both the our neighbor's faith and then that academic piece where we study to show ourselves approved, that's absolutely critical. And then I think for me, the third piece is the continuation of how do we actually do this work of ministry? How do we walk humbly? How do we love justice? How do we do, right, this Micah 6:8 calling? And figuring out more ways for students to have paths to do that that aren't necessarily going to run through their congregations or through their churches. It's just an immediate need. We now train more chaplains because hospitals, hospice,
Mm.
prisons, jails, schools, workplaces. Most people are receiving spiritual care from a chaplain than they are from a pastor.
Mhm.
So we've really had to think about, and we have to continue to think about, really shifting the curriculum to meet the reality of what's happening in religion versus whatever we wish it was or whatever it used to be.
Wow. Wow. That's great. That's really great. So let's get back to the students. Alternative Spring Break, HUR raised over $100,000 to send these wonderful, I think it's like 1,200 Howard University students to do alternative spring break in different cities across the country. Any word about how they're doing? How did that go?
I think that the students who go are absolutely transformed by it. And I also want to add, this is the part people don't talk about sometimes. The students are always accompanied by chaperones, the faculty members, staff members, administrators, or what have you. And the Divinity School, we have sent so many of the staff of the Divinity School on trips with students for alternative spring breaks. It's transformative for them as well, right? So the students immerse themselves in service learning, but the people who are going with those students, they're also being changed and shifted by seeing the passion of what the students are doing. And they also have a sense of responsibility and calling. This is an incredible part about Howard. It is one of the few things that connects all of the colleges and universities, because alternative spring break is available for both undergraduate students and graduate students as well. So this is one thing that the entire campus can participate in. And I'm glad that we've always been a part of that.
Well, we are definitely glad to be a part of it, and happy that our listeners helped us to raise all that money for the Howard University students. And all the students that come through the radio station on that Radiothon day are just amazing and inspiring.
You had a ton of law school students this year too. I was listening, and so there were a number of law school students, and we share campus with the law school. And so you had an amazing group of young folks who were there, and thank you for what you do and for your listeners.
Oh, of course, of course. So let's put the cover of Dean Pierce's book up, In My Grandmother's House: Black Women, Faith, and the Stories We Inherit, Yolanda Pierce. Dean Pierce, you were recently in New Orleans and for a
Yes.
book reading. Tell us about that.
So there's this wonderful restaurant in New Orleans. It's called Melba's, and they have a few locations. Melba's is located in a food desert and a book desert. Right. So we've heard about food deserts, particularly in the African American community, our communities that don't have grocery stores, access to fresh food. So this is a community in New Orleans that is a food desert. They opened up a restaurant there, but it is also a book desert, meaning that there is not local access to either public libraries or bookstores.
Wow.
And we don't think about this. Many of our communities are located in book deserts. So what they do is they bring writers, and over lunch, they have customers come in, they order food, they receive a book, and you as the author talk to them about your book and about. Over the course of the past few years, this restaurant has given away thousands and thousands and thousands of free books. This is completely free to any customer who walks in the door. But it's such a powerful expression of what we're talking about, faith in action, because this project was started by a woman who went to Divinity school. She runs a restaurant, right? Like her calling is to run a restaurant, right? But how she sees her faith is that she wants to make sure the community that she serves, which is in a desert, a food desert and a book desert, that they both have nutritious food and they have material to read. This was probably one of the best events that I've done in a very, very long time. The gratitude when you see people walk in and they walk out with a free book. Powerful experience.
Wow. Well, please, we don't want to give out too many free books. We want you to go to anywhere books are sold and get In My Grandmother's House: Black Women, Faith, and the Stories We Inherit. Yolanda Pierce, Dean of the Howard University School of Divinity. And I want to thank everybody who's joined us in the chat today. And I'm going to ask Dean Pierce to give us our final word or a prayer, whichever you choose, for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you. It's an honor to be given the final word. My final word is this: we need each other. We talk a lot about self-care, but we don't often talk about community care. And so part of what it means to be in a faith community, or to be at a place like Howard, at a HBCU, or to even live in a city like Washington, D.C., what's revealed to you is how much we need each other. We are our brother and our sister's keepers. And so at the core of almost every faith tradition is treat others with kindness, so you will also be treated with kindness. I think that is a powerful reminder of the world in which we live, which is so divided, so divisive. So much is happening. The reminder to be kind to others, to be kind to yourself, but to live in a community where we take care of one another. We're looking out for one another. We can't do this alone. We need our churches, our mosques, our synagogues. We need our schools, our sororities, our fraternities. We need our families. And we need not just our grandmothers, but the other mothers, the aunties and the big mamas and the Pookie and them. The folks who are family, not by blood, but by choice and by decision. And I am so happy to be a part of a large extended family at the Howard University School of Divinity.
Dr. Pierce, Dean Yolanda Pierce, you are such a bright light, and it has been a great honor to have you on HUR at Home Inspiration. And I encourage you, we'll be praying for you, and we're thankful for all that you're doing with the Howard University School of Divinity and in this family of people that we call Christians, that we call people of faith, to be such an inspiration through your books and through what you do. Thank you. Thank you so much. And God bless you.
Thank you. And God bless you.
And God bless everybody who joined us in the chat today. Please spread the word. If you know someone that would really benefit from hearing this conversation, you can find it on YouTube and it'll be posted on WHUR.com. I'm Jacquie Gales Webb. God bless you. Please be safe and be blessed.